How do you move from being a scholarly institute of Holocaust and genocide studies to an activist with genocide prevention now as a vehicle for understanding how to stop future genocides?
How do you move from scholarship, from learning, studying about genocide, to efforts to think, plan, do things about preventing genocide in the real world? There are lots of analogies, like in medicine. You start by tracking a disease. This is the way it begins. This is the way it progresses. That's what happens. Now, what happens if we introduce hot baths and aspirin, antibiotics, and so forth? The same pattern has taken place for us, for the field of genocide studies. In 1985, we undertook to publish the first international newsletter about genocide. We made a rule for ourselves that we would not start unless we had the sponsorship of some 5 different, let's use one word, ethnicities. Because there was nothing in the world that represented peoples coming together. There were organs of individual peoples speaking of their genocide, like the Holocaust, like the Armenian genocide. There was nothing of people speaking of genocide to all peoples. We did it. We distributed that word-processed magazine. I would carry the hundreds of copies to the post office, became buddies with the postmaster, and we'd stamp away, and it went out to any number of countries in the world. I also got hell one day. A man called and identified himself as a significant executive at Yad Vashem, and he was furious because our word processor, we didn't have fonts in those days, we had one dedicated machine. Our word processor was turning out T's that looked like a cross, and for him that was a blasphemous act for Jews in the land of Israel. We did that for 10 years with many, many issues. Years later, the time had come with the world full of websites for us to move to a new publication format. But by now we were moving conceptually, increasingly, towards not only studying, but towards engaging the terrible questions of how do you prevent genocide? How do you respond to genocide? Should the world be responding to what's happening in Syria now? Is there a sane way to respond when it's no longer, quote, simply a revolution against a tyrannical regime, but it already has fundamentalist Islamic Al-Qaeda forces playing a major part in the revolution, and after that planning to go on in their worldwide terrorist campaign? Should the world intervene in Sudan, where killing continues to go on now, year after year? Thousands of people are dying, thousands of people are without homes as the winter comes on. We think, talk, prevention now. We're at the beginning. Like in medicine, when we were at the beginning of treatments of cancer. Cancer isn't over yet, but there is huge progress. Thousands of people are living with cancers that used to kill them. We now have a range of beginning techniques for prevention. The legal area is one major arena where there has been significant progress. It's not enough, but we now have courts that we never had before. International courts in The Hague, international courts set up by the United Nations for the after the fact of the genocides in Rwanda and Yugoslavia. We now have people going to jail for having led genocides, for having been accomplices to genocide. That's a beginning there. We have an enormous increase in information journalistically, tracking many events that absolutely disappeared into the back pages. We have people all over the world who express care and who contribute to campaigns for relief funds, for example, to Sudan. We also have millions of people who've contributed funds to Sudan, and the funds have done nothing because we are still at a very elementary beginning point, but we are beginning to do prevention. Genocide Prevention Now, the web magazine, GPN, that our institute created 3 years ago, purposely highlights the concept of prevention in its title. The issue we just published yesterday has 3 major pieces by outstanding scholars on concepts of prevention in the legal system, in the political system. We also have the uncanny event that one genocide scholar who simply couldn't take it anymore, what's happening in Sudan, Professor Samuel Totten, University of Arkansas, is right now in Sudan with several thousand tons of relief food because he couldn't stand anymore putting out the many books he puts out and the many articles he publishes, including in our web magazine, and he's there with his life on the line.